Hi and welcome to Mike's V8 Garage. This time I'm downgrading the suspension on my Jaguar XKR. Yes, you heard me right, I'm downgrading the suspension, and there's a bit of a thought process behind this. So for those of you that have been watching this channel from the start, you poor sods, the very first video I ever put on YouTube was me basically standing in the garage talking for about half an hour on what I wanted to do with my Jaguar XKR. This is now over a year later, well over a year later, and I'm finally getting around to one of the first things, which was sorting out the suspension. So what's on there currently is a set of these, which is basically XKR-S Shocks. So it's the 4.2 XKR-S, which is a limited edition that was done at the end of the initial 4.2 variant's life cycle, coupled with a set of progressive lowering springs, which I got from the aftermarket. Put those together and it was a reasonable suspension package. However, it was too firm for Devon back roads. On a more flat surface, on the track or something like that, this would be a really good setup. However, I don't live on a racetrack, and it was basically skittering, not really handling back roads well, and just generally making the car feel quite unstable at speed, which is not what you want. So what I actually decided I need to do is go softer, and for that reason I bought a set of Jaguar XK suspension. So that's the normally aspirated 4.2 XK. A little bit battered, but they do work and they're a good proof of concept. My thinking is the standard XKR suspension is actually quite firm as well. This is firmer, the suspension I showed you there is firmer than that. I want something that's fairly smooth and compliant, more GT than sports car. The XK suspension therefore seemed to be both a cheap and sensible solution to at least try, and I got these for something like 200 or 300 quid. It was really cheap because nobody wants it, they all want the stiff sporty stuff. Their loss. So I'm in the middle of fitting these, and already the indications are looking promising. So let's get on with it. So I think it's worth just doing a quick recap on this car, because most of the time you'll see me working on that. But this was the original one I started doing YouTube with, and there's a fair few jobs still outstanding. Cracked light there, which is going to get replaced. A very loud exhaust there because I've got sports cats fitted, and the standard exhaust is really designed for them to muffle the initial sound, so they're far too loud. Got an idea about that one, more to follow on that. Wheels and tyres, it's got a set of Dunlops on there which aren't particularly good, so a set of either Michelin's or Goodyear's are going to replace them. And the suspension I've already mentioned, I've got this side still to do, the other side is done. So that's going to be completed today. Cosmetically it needs a good detail because there's a lot of swirling and so on, and most importantly those headlights are quite yellow, discoloured and faded. The good thing is they're not bad underneath and they should respond well to a good polish. And as said, same thing on this side. New shocks are on there, no massive difference in ride height, even though it was lowering springs that were on there before because I brought them up a little bit with some suspension rings. So the ride height should remain unchanged, but the ride quality should be significantly better. So without further ado, I'm going to get on and get the last two shocks, or coilovers rather, fitted there and there. So I've got the car jacked up already, nothing particularly complex about that, supported with the jack stand. You can see the shock, or the coilover rather, up there. There's two basic things you need to do. The rears are actually fairly simple, unless, like the other side, the main bolt is cross-threaded into the suspension arm, at which point it becomes a bit of a pain. This one, however, is nice and easy. Touch wood. So what you've got is four nuts holding the top of the suspension on. You have to dig apart the boot trim to get at it, but it's pretty simple. They're undone now and off. All that's left then is I believe it's a 21 mil socket nut on the bottom, bolt rather, I'll get there in the end. That just needs undone, and theoretically the whole shock absorber, because the suspension is already in droop, we'll just be able to be manoeuvred out and put back in. Nice and simple. So I'll get on with that. is that simple. When the bolt isn't cross-threaded. As I said, the other side, because it's an aluminium suspension arm and a steel bolt, it went in at just the wrong angle and things happened. So at some point I'll need to replace that arm, but just now this one on the other side is back in and it's certainly never coming out again. So that'll do just now. But yeah, try and avoid doing that because it adds pain. As you can see, the rest of the shock, the coilover rather, comes out pretty easily. One thing to note while I'm thinking about it though, is you'll notice the yellow paint mark there, and that's just to locate when you're going back in, because these things need to be clocked, because once the spring, the top mount and the damper are all together, you can't rotate the damper. So if you get that 90 degrees the wrong way, it's never going in there. It has to be clocked between these top bolts and the damper. Be aware. Ask me how I know that for that one. So therefore, these are already clocked. I've marked the inner bolt. And the replacement arm, you'll see, has had the same bolt marked just so I can orient it. And I know it's clocked already because I've not had these apart. And they've come off a car with the same suspension setup, so I don't need to worry about that. But if you are replacing dampers or top mounts or gaiters or anything like that, and you have to get the coilover apart, mark it up, clock it, save yourself a lot of time and having to do it again. But anyway, let's get straight on with fitting this and then we can put it all back together. The main problem is visibility. And here you call it. Tell that's a bit of a faff because you can't see where you're placing the bolts, or the studs rather. As I said, fiddle about, you'll generally get it. If it's clocked correctly, that at least gives you a slight guide. And then you just get the top nuts on before the whole lot falls out again. Okay, so that's the bolts. The nuts snugs in on the studs. I'll get the right terminology at some point. And that just stops the shock moving, holds it in place, but you don't need to do them up fully tight yet because it won't really work until the car's at rest anyway and the suspension's fully settled. One thing I am going to do though is quickly turn on the ignition and just make sure I don't get a CATS fault, because although the XK and the XKR-S, the 4.2 anyway, dampers are compatible, what I don't want to find out after putting everything back together is that the damper on this side is faulty and I've got to take it all apart again. So check first and let's see. And I'm happy to report back that that's all good, so I can get in with buttoning this up now. I suspect you'll find that's not in the workshop manual. But it does work. But that's one of the easy ways to, well, that's one of the easy ways to cross-thread that bolt, is if you start winding it in without properly seating it first. We've got the bolt in. It's turning freely by hand, so it's not sort of bound as far as I can tell. I'm now going to start very carefully tightening it and make sure it doesn't seize or cross-thread or anything like that. Hopefully it'll go all the way in, and that's one installed. That went in easy, so that's one rear shock installed. Onto the front. Right, so we're ready to do the front now. A little bit more involved, but in some ways easier. As long as you don't get a cross-threaded bolt, obviously. Need a few more tools as well. So the same 14mm nuts holding the top of the shock on, they're already off. And then the shock, if you look at the one I'm about to fit, this one you don't need to worry about clocking, or in fact you do, but it's a bit more obvious which way it goes on. And it's got a T60 Torx head. bolt that holds it in, which I'm just going to start loosening now. Now that'll probably come out so far, and then it'll seize, or stick rather. So the next thing you've got to do is allow this whole spindle and lower suspension arms to come down and pivot, and that'll give you the room to both get that coilover down and then get it out. So you've got to undo this top arm here. So to get that top arm off, it's a 19mm nut, and you need an 8mm spanner just to hold the ball joint while you're turning the nut. But a good bit of penetrating oil beforehand on all of it, and it generally comes off quite easily. Here goes. There we go. And what it always do is you saw me there, stick a knee under the brake disc there, because otherwise when this goes it'll jerk away, and you've got brake lines and another sort of electrical lines there, and what you don't want is this to jerk all the way out and then snap. Now ironically, having just taken that off, one of the first things to do is then temporarily re-secure it, because the next thing you've got to get off is the drop link. Now there's two ways you can do this. You can either take the whole thing off, which is slightly risky, or you can just take the lower part off, which is just a standard bolt. So there's a 15mm nut on a 13mm bolt. That allows you to undo it and then free off the drop link. You can undo the top as well, but that involves risking it with an Allen key and things snapping, so I'm just going to take the bottom part off. Okay, it's a nut out, and as you'll notice midway through there, a jack suddenly appeared, and that's because when you release the drop link you have actually got a bit of drop in the suspension that's then taken up, and also it makes it more difficult to get the bolt out. So I just supported that, and now it's just a case of getting that bolt out. And that's it out. You won't be able to fully withdraw the bolt because it fouls on one of the other suspension arms, but you can withdraw it enough to just slide the bottom half of the drop link off, and that drop link's now hanging free. And therefore, as soon as I take this top mount off again, suddenly everything will come away. And as you can see now, I can suddenly move that shock absorber, and if the top mount's already done, I can pretty much get it out of the mounting holes. And now, having loosened the bolt already, I can just continue to unwind it, the bottom bolt, there we go, and out it comes. And that shock absorber, with a little bit of finagling, because it will be a bit stiff, is now ready to come out. So as you can see, not as easy as the back, but it's not difficult with the right tools and knowing what you do have to take out. The first time I did this, I was trying to take off the bottom of the bottom suspension arms and all sorts of things, because I didn't realise the drop link was holding that much tension in the lower suspension. But if you just release that drop link, suddenly you've got the movement and you can get out of the way. So, not bad, not good. And installation is just the reversal of removal. copper grease on the bolt, and I'm going to leave that top mount nut on there because that just keeps everything roughly in line. It means when I move the suspension up and down to try and get the holes aligned, it's going to move in the correct arcs, and therefore I've got more chance of lining it up. Plus it means I'm not leg lifting a flipping big heavy spindle with a brake disc on it. So that's that done. The next thing is using a jack, again just move the suspension up and down, get the drop link lined up and ready to go on, which it is. And that's that tight. Now it's just the top nut to do up, and because it's already seated, it's just a case of buzzing it up. That's everything checked, done up, secure, finished. So wheel on and let's take it for a drive. And so after all that work, it's now time to take it for a quick drive and see whether it's been worth it. So let's go. So I'm underway now, out in the back roads, and straight away you can feel the car's a lot more comfortable, and it's not skittering, it's not juddering around the way it used to on uneven surfaces. So on level surfaces it was fine, but as soon as you got to the likes of Devon back roads, which are definitely not level, it was just constantly trying to skitter and unhappy, and I think that's because it was so firm, the wheels were just losing that bit of traction, and the whole thing was just moving around. So already that's pretty much gone. It's still a firm ride, but that's fine, that's kind of what I want for this car anyway. But it's a lot more confident in corners, and I've been out for a little bit longer before this video. I can turn in at a far greater speed before than I would have before, and I'm not constantly scared it's going to go off in a direction I don't intend. So in terms of that, definite result. It's made a big difference. The overall ride and handling in this car is significantly improved. Even considering the shocks that are fitted are fairly old and tired, especially on the rear, the difference is still noticeable. And even more so when I sent the 20-inch alloys that are fitted to it now off to be refurbished. What I did was put the 18s that I bought, the Venus alloys, XK Venus alloys, on there just temporarily so the car wasn't up on jack stands. And I thought at first they wouldn't fit. Well, firstly, two things I've realised. A, they do fit. They fit perfectly over the XKR brakes, so there's no issues there. The 18s will go straight on. And secondly, they make a massive difference, even over and above, to the overall ride and handling of the car. To the point where, although I've just had the 20s refurbished and they're back in the car now and it's back to standard, as soon as I can, I'm going to be getting the 18s refurbished, and then they'll be going back in the car, and I suspect they'll be staying. Aesthetically, it's a step down, I do admit that, and you can see the pictures I'm putting up now. You know, the 18s are nice, but the 20s are arguably nicer. But the whole point of what I'm doing to this car is function over form. And ultimately, those 18s handle better, ride better, corner better, and save 15 kilograms, because I weighed them, of unsprung weight as a set compared to the 20s. And 15 kilograms of weight saved on the wheels is a big thing. So I think the sacrifice is worth it, and that's the plan going forward. Until then, tomorrow this will be going up to an independent specialist, the one that rebuilt the engine previously, so Swallows, and they're going to fix a long-term fault that I've had with the ABS unit, and also dig into one or two other things as well. So once that's done, I'll then get on with a variety of other little jobs. The headlights need done, there's work to the brakes, there's work to the exhaust, and all of that will be in the next video I do. But until then, if you've liked what you've seen, please consider subscribing, giving me a like down below, or commenting. It does help things, and it's nice getting feedback, positive or negative. But other than that, hope you enjoyed the video, and look forward to seeing you next time.